Welcome back to your channel LeOo Storyland. Here we uncover a real Reddit story. If you liked my video, please like, share, subscribe.
My name is Virginia Cruz and I'm 31 years old. I still remember the exact sound of my parents laughing. Not the warm kind, not the kind that fills a room with safety, the sharp, cruel kind that cuts right through you and leaves a mark no one else can see. It happened at the family picnic on a Sunday afternoon in late July, with paper plates and potato salad and the kind of fake smiles that my family has always been very good at. My sister, Clarissa, raised her glass, this dramatic little gesture she has, like she's performing for an audience, and said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, to the one who always shows up broke, needy, and still hoping to matter. And my parents laughed. My father's shoulders shook. My mother covered her mouth like she was trying to hide it, but she wasn't trying very hard. The cousins went quiet. My aunt looked down at her plate. And I sat there, holding my glass of iced tea, feeling the blood drain from my face. What nobody at that table knew, what Clarissa had apparently forgotten, or chosen to forget, was that sitting across from her, the woman she had just publicly humiliated, was the same woman who had quietly, over the course of 4 years, lent her $127,000. Not a penny of it repaid. Not a single thank you text. Not even an acknowledgement that the money existed. Let me take you back to where this actually started, because this story doesn't begin at a picnic. It begins 6 years ago, when I was 25 and had just landed a decently paying job in financial consulting after grinding through 2 years of unpaid internships and a mountain of student debt. I wasn't rich. I wasn't even comfortable. But I was disciplined, and I kept a budget like most people keep secrets, tightly and with a lot of anxiety. Clarissa, who is 3 years older than me, was going through what my mother called her difficult phase. What it actually was, a failed business, a divorce, a custody situation that required lawyer fees, and a lifestyle that Clarissa refused to scale back no matter how bad things got. She called me one night crying. The kind of crying that reaches through the phone and squeezes your chest. She said she was going to lose her apartment. She said her daughter, my niece Rosalie, was going to have nowhere to sleep. I wired her $8,000 the next morning. I didn't ask for paperwork. I didn't set a repayment date. I was her sister. That's what you do. Except that's not what you do. That's what I did, once and then again, and then again, and then it became a pattern so normalized that Clarissa stopped even pretending it was temporary. The calls evolved. First it was emergencies. Then it was opportunities, a new business idea, a car she needed for work, a deposit on a better apartment in a better school district for Rosalie. I said yes more than I should have because every time I hesitated, she brought up Rosalie. She knew exactly which lever to pull. My niece was innocent in all of this, and I loved her, and Clarissa used that love like a credit card with no limit. I kept records. That part matters. I kept every bank transfer receipt, every Venmo screenshot, every text message where she confirmed she received the money. I have a folder on my laptop. I named it Family with a little lock emoji, which in hindsight feels both sad and appropriate, and in that folder is a running spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, stated purposes, Clarissa's acknowledgments, $127,420. The $420 was from a random Tuesday when she said she needed groceries and I didn't ask questions. Back to the picnic. After my parents laughed at Clarissa's toast, after the table settled back into its uncomfortable silence, I lifted my glass. My hand was steady, which surprised me, because my heart was doing something violent in my chest. I looked directly at Clarissa, not at my parents, not at the cousins, just at her, and I said, to the desperate one who. And then I stopped. I put my glass down. I picked up my phone instead. I opened the folder. I pulled up the spreadsheet. And I slid my phone across the table to my mother, who was sitting closest to me, and said, very quietly, I think you should look at this before you keep laughing. My mother picked up the phone the way you pick up something you're not sure is safe. She looked at the screen. Her expression didn't change right away. It took about 4 seconds, the time it takes for the brain to process something it genuinely did not expect, and then the color left her face in a way I had never seen before. She passed the phone to my father without saying a word. Clarissa, across the table, had gone very still. She knew what was on that phone. She had always known. My father looked at the screen for a long time. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at Clarissa. The backyard had gotten so quiet that I could hear the neighbors' wind chimes 2 houses down. Rosalie, who was 7 and sitting at the kids' table nearby, called out asking if anyone wanted to play, and nobody answered her, and she went back to her coloring book, unbothered and unaware that the adult table had just become a crime scene. Clarissa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. What came out was, those weren't loans, those were. Read the texts, I said. You called them loans every single time. The silence that followed those words was the longest silence I have ever sat inside. Clarissa's mouth was still slightly open, like she had more to say, but her brain had cut the connection between thought and speech. My father set my phone down on the table with the kind of careful, deliberate movement that people use when they are buying themselves time. My mother was pressing her fingers against her lips, and I could see her eyes moving the way eyes move when someone is doing rapid, uncomfortable math. Because the math was right there on the screen. Date by date. Transfer by transfer. $127,420, documented with the kind of precision that only someone who always knew this moment might eventually come does. My aunt, who had been quietly refilling her cup near the cooler, put the lid back on without pouring anything and walked inside the house. The cousins found reasons to check their phones. The picnic, which had been so carefully arranged, my mother's checkered tablecloth, the centerpiece with a little American flag, the store-bought pie that she always pretended she baked, was dismantling itself in real time, not from anything dramatic, but from the specific, suffocating weight of a truth that had been sitting under the surface for years and had finally broken through. Clarissa recovered first, the way she always recovers, by going on offense. She looked at my parents, not at me, and said she kept records on her own sister. What kind of person does that? It was a smart deflection. She was trying to make the story about my character instead of her debt. I had seen her do this before, in her divorce proceedings, in arguments with neighbors, in the one time a landlord tried to keep her security deposit. Clarissa is genuinely talented at reframing. Under different circumstances, she could have been a lawyer. But my mother didn't take the bait this time. She picked up my phone again and scrolled slowly through the spreadsheet, and then she did something I was not expecting. She went to the text thread that I had screenshotted and saved in the same folder. The one where Clarissa, in her own words, on multiple separate occasions, had written things like, "I'll pay this back as soon as the business stabilizes, and this is the last time, I promise. Virginia, I'll get you back for everything," and, most damning of all, a message from 3 years ago that said, "I know I owe you so much. I have a number in my head and it scares me. I'll fix it." My mother read that one twice. I watched her read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on the table and looked at Clarissa with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, exactly. Something heavier than anger. Something closer to grief. "Clarissa," my mother said, and that was all she said. Just her name. But the way she said it carried everything. My father, to his credit, did not try to minimize it. He is a man who has always preferred to avoid conflict, who has spent most of his life finding the smoothest possible path through difficult situations. And I had spent years resenting that quality in him because it usually meant that Clarissa's behavior went unchallenged. But sitting at that picnic table with my phone in front of him, he looked at me with something in his eyes that I can only describe as recognition. Like he was seeing something he had chosen not to see for a very long time and was now, finally, looking directly at it. He said, "How long have you been carrying this?" And I said, "For years." He nodded slowly. He didn't say he was sorry right then. He would say it later, privately, when he called me the following Tuesday evening and talked for 40 minutes in a way he had never talked to me before. But at the table, he just nodded, and that nod meant more to me than 100 apologies would have in that moment, because it was honest, and it was quiet, and it was real. Clarissa left the picnic early. She gathered her bag and called Rosalie over from the kids' table and walked to her car without hugging anyone goodbye. At the last moment, she turned back and looked at me across the yard, and I want to be accurate about what I saw on her face because I have thought about it many times since. It was not remorse, not exactly. It was something more complicated. It was the face of a person who has been caught, yes, but who is also, somewhere underneath the defensiveness and the anger, aware that they have done something they cannot undo and cannot explain away. Whether that awareness ever becomes accountability, that is a different story, and one that is still being written. What I want you to understand is that I did not walk away from that picnic feeling victorious. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect these moments to feel like triumph, and they don't. They feel like loss. I lost the comfortable lie that my family was functional. I lost the version of my sister that I had been holding on to, the one who was struggling, yes, but who would eventually come through, who would eventually be who I needed her to be. I lost the quiet hope that my parents had always seen me clearly, even when they didn't show it. What I gained was something harder to name but more durable. I stopped waiting to matter to people who had shown me, repeatedly, that they were comfortable with me not mattering. I stopped shrinking. I started, slowly, building a life that was actually mine, my savings restored, my boundaries intact, my sense of self no longer dependent on the approval of people who laughed at me at picnics. Virginia Cruz is still 31 years old. She still loves her niece Rosalie completely and without condition. She still shows up, but now she decides where and for whom and on what terms. If this story moved something in you, if it made you feel seen or less alone, please subscribe to this channel and share this with someone who needs to hear it. New stories every week, because everyone deserves to be reminded that their worth was never up for debate.